Perfect. So, hi, everyone. I'm Jody Bechtold. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in the state of Pennsylvania. And this is the Roundtable for Ethics, and we're excited to have you back.
And I'm Dave Ledgerwood. I'm a professor in psychiatry at Wayne State University in Detroit, and also a clinical psychologist. Been working with people with addictions, including gambling disorder, for about 25 years, and also do quite a bit of research in the area. I'm very excited to be talking to you. I know a lot of the folks who are on this presentation now just saw our presentation on ethics. So this is sort of a continuation of that, but Jody, I don't know. I mean, I think maybe opening it up initially to any thoughts or questions that people might have about the last segment, because I know there were quite a few. There were a lot of really good discussions and questions that people were having on the other presentation. Just by show of hands, for those of you who have your cameras on, how many of you were on the ethics presentation that was just on? Not sure if I'm seeing everybody. Oh, most people have their cameras off. So. Okay, we got a lot of.
Here we go. Yeah. Okay, and there were a couple that jumped over from a previous, from a different session, as Peter was noting. And so, Peter, we are just posing some questions and having some discussion about the ethics and the clinical challenges related to what we have, particularly with this new intersection of technology and how it relates to the work that we do. So hopefully that gives you a brief backdrop to what some of the other people that said they were already on the earlier session are coming over from.
Excellent. Oh, sorry, Jody, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and just wanted to do time check that we'll be getting some time before we end the session. And what we have dedicated for this entire, I believe it's 45 minutes, is different cases. And so the more interaction, the better. So keep using the chat. And if you want to unmute yourself, please do so as well.
Great. So maybe what we could do is we can break into one of the first sort of vignettes here, and then open it up for discussion with everybody on the presentation. So we've been talking about a lot of different areas related to technology, and those of you who are on the previous call, I won't do a big summary of what we were just talking about, but broadly speaking, we were talking about things like confidentiality and privacy and safety and competency in using technologies among clinicians, and sort of regulations, and whether we could do things like see clients across state lines and that sort of thing. And where we ended off was at this point of talking about specific examples, specific vignettes. And I'll go through the first one here. So if you've been working with Mrs. Johnson for several sessions using Doxy.me, which is a platform that is HIPAA compliant and secure for doing telehealth types of psychotherapy approaches for several sessions. In addition to her gambling, you are aware that she experiences significant depression and also seeking help to address trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder issues. At one of her sessions, she reports to you that she had been emotionally overwhelmed this week and has seriously considered suicide at several points during the week. You ask her if she is currently at home, but she reports that she is not, and she is in her car driving. And so this is a pretty major one. It's something we kind of alluded to at the end of our last talk, for those of you who are on now. But how would you address this from a clinical perspective? And given that there are about 100 people on here, it's fine if you want to unmute yourself and just shout it out, or if you'd rather respond to the chat. Jody and I will try and sort of monitor the chat and go through questions or comments that come through there. But as we're looking, because someone says, please park the car, which is, I think, a very good thing to say.
Someone said, tell me exactly where you are.
Exactly.
Right? I will come to you. Okay.
So whatever other sort of interventions would you, or things would you want to sort of say to the client or try and work out with the client at this point?
Park the car in a safe place. Seek available help.
Yeah.
Seek available help.
Okay.
Sometimes not logical or logistically okay to get to that person, but somebody needs to get to that person to help them feel safe.
So
That's it.
who would you, not you personally specifically, but what kinds of people would you suggest in that
Like a crisis hotline, suicide crisis hotline, police if necessary, ER, 911. Those are what come to me first.
Okay, great. And what if that individual doesn't want that kind of help?
See what they do want.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Someone is commenting that they would already start to do the risk assessment, right? Is there a plan? What's the intent? Anything like that?
So asking for a license plate number. This is something that we were talking about on the last presentation, this idea of if we're using telehealth-based interventions, it creates a lot of uncertainty. If a person is in their own home, then you kind of know where they are. But if they're sort of on the road, or if they're elsewhere at another location and they call you and they're in distress, it's harder, it's more difficult to sort of intervene, right? So asking her to pull over and talk to you for a while is a great start. I'm seeing a number of other things. So asking, finding out if we can get people to go get out there, whether that's emergency services or somebody else, that's another great intervention. Other things?
Kind of proactive, hindsight's 2020, but this is a great example of why it's so important to make sure you talk about the informed consent and the risks of using technology, particularly video, and making sure that individuals oftentimes, understand that when using technology is not appropriate and when they would be better suited seeking care in a different manner.
That's a hugely important point. Usually when we're talking about confidentiality and limits to confidentiality, we usually provide some of the limits being around sort of suicidality. And if we're worried that a person is not safe, we will have to take some actions to make them safe, all the way up to potentially getting a person sort of admitted to the hospital if they're suicidal or psychotic or other things are going on. And in this case, where someone is out driving around, it makes it a lot more challenging, right? So we don't necessarily know where they are. If we say we really are worried about you and we think you should go to the emergency room, and they say, no, I'm not going to do that, or they're so overwhelmed that it's not safe for them to do that, then we need to have some things in our toolbox. And we also, as Jody is saying, have to, let the client know this, that if they're, we'd like for you to know where you are during our sessions. And if we feel like you are at risk of harming yourself or hurting someone else, then we need to take some actions in that circumstance, right? Other thoughts?
I think in Illinois, this is Bill, I think in Illinois that we have an 800 gambler line that has staffed to 24/7 with someone who is a professional in gambling disorder and also a licensed counselor. So that would be a good number to have in your toolbox in case you don't feel you're the one to answer that. I know it's best if you can answer them all, but sometimes perhaps you can't. You could give them that 800 number. So,
So having additional counseling resources at your fingertips.
The other thing that's helpful here is, thinking about the emergency contact. Who did they designate at the start of therapy as their emergency contact, and how could you reach out to them to potentially find out where this person is, or, that's the whole point of them being designated as an emergency contact.
And there's a lot of options there. There is an option if you know that your client is on a cell phone, for example, and you know that cell phone number, that police could be notified and could identify where the person is through cell phone signals and through license plate number, for example. But what if, as Jody was sort of saying, client says, I don't want you to call the police. I want you to call my husband or my wife and have them come out to meet me, and then I'll go with them and we'll go to the hospital, right? Which might be a better option in some circumstances than having that information close at hand could be a benefit too, right?
Yeah. And someone said the client can always decline to tell us. I mean, maybe you're referring to emergency contact. And this is a great opportunity to then really have the conversation about when teletherapy is appropriate and when it's not. Because if you are not able to have all of the things in place to make sure that you are providing the safest of care, then you shouldn't be, forced to have to provide that care, right? So sometimes a client might say, I don't want to give you any consents at all. And you say, we need to talk about this. And here's why I need an emergency contact if we're going to do video therapy. And explain it more so that they understand emergency contact does not give release of information to all things.
Someone made a comment, if the person is in Chicago, you can request a crisis intervention officer to meet them. So that's a great resource. Another person, I think, makes a really great point here. Make sure informed consent use of the emergency release is discussed in detail. So as Jody kind of said in our last presentation, don't just put it in your consent form and assume that your client's going to read it, right? You want to be able to sort of discuss it with the person in your early sessions. I would kind of add to that. I have found over the years that I actually go through an informed consent process with my clients, but at the time the person's really overwhelmed and experiencing thoughts of suicide, they don't really remember that discussion. So it might take sometimes some repetition and sometimes sort of reminding them if you have some concerns about what they're going through, and saying, I want to make sure that you're safe. That I'm obligated to make sure that you're protected if I feel like you're at risk of suicide or of hurting yourself, right? Other thoughts? Okay. Well, we can move on to the next question, or the next vignette. So you work as a family counselor for a community service organization. As a counselor, you're required to see your clients in their own home to offer counseling support. You've been working for quite some time with Lucy, a single mother with 2 kids, both boys. However, you have been unable to develop a good rapport with this client. After your last visit to Lucy's home, you feel that she's starting to develop rapport and is feeling more comfortable to open up and disclose her issues. 1 week has passed and you're looking forward to continue building your relationship with Lucy. However, when you get to Lucy's home, she looks very distressed. One of her kids is feeling very sick and couldn't go to school. And if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. Lucy wants to take them to see a doctor, but she doesn't have a car. Her house is 3 miles away from the closest bus stop. And she discloses to you that she does not have enough money for a taxi. Your organizational policy states that counselors should not offer services such as money, ride, babysitting, grocery shopping, etc. to clients. If the client needs any of these services, they need to contact community center and arrange for such support. However, when you call a community center to arrange transportation, nobody's available at that time. Lucy asks if you could take them to see a doctor as your car is equipped with a baby seat. So I think there's questions on the next one. Again, this is a boundary related sort of scenario, less technological, although there is a car involved, which is technology on some level. As a counselor, what would you do? What factors would you need to consider? What are the consequences if you agree to give the client a ride? What are the consequences if you deny the client a ride? And how could it impact your relationship with the client? So let's open it up to discussion here. So there's a variety of issues here. Potentially clinical, ethical, safety, a number of other things. Thoughts?
Call your supervisor, talk with the supervisor. Boundaries serve me well when working with clients, semi-permeable boundaries. Consult with the supervisor. So everybody's saying supervisor, supervisor, supervisor.
I like that. Anyone brave enough to unmute and sort of talk about saying
I would.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's Tom.
Hey, Tom.
When I was a parole officer, I used to give my clients rides. And it's like, I guess things were different then, but when you do that, they're in your car. And if something happened, accident or whatever, or something went down, it's like, it's now when I think about it, I say, why did I do that so much?
That's a great point. It's a great point. So you have some liability there if it's in your own car, right? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, we have follow the protocols, see about an ambulance, but one that went past real fast was, what about telemedicine
Mhm.
as a first? So there's your technology. See if you can get an emergency telemedicine session for the child so there's no transportation involved.
Mhm. I think that's a great option. You know, how do you think this might impact? Let's say you call your supervisor and your supervisor says, liability wise, no, we can't do that. How do you think it might impact on your relationship with the client? Feel free to unmute.
Could impact negatively. They could disengage. What about if the child's health is really near death? Liability is a strong risk. Call the ambulance. You can't just do nothing.
Right. I guess, part of that is sort of assuming the level of severity of the illness of the child, right? So, obviously if the immediate medical attention is required, you'd want to call an ambulance. But if it's something where, let's say the child has an ear infection and there's no way to get to a clinic, right? Is there something you can do in that circumstance? I mean, if you call an ambulance, then the family's going to get a huge bill, right? They're going to have to pay a lot of money. When they get a bill from the ambulance, that could damage your clinical relationship with them. Are there other sort of creative solutions there? I know there's a lot of comments in the chat.
Yeah, once Uber, use the natural supports of family,
Mhm.
right? Be able to explain the policy and the rules of why they can't transport the child. Talk to the neighbor, right?
Okay, neighbor, family member,
Mhm.
helping the client to problem solve, perhaps, to arrange some kind of transportation, right? So I think these are all really good solutions. I think this is more, in some ways, more of a clinical dilemma than an ethical dilemma, right? So it's like, but it incorporates elements of liability and other aspects.
Mhm.
Right. I think we're probably good with that one. So contacts, support systems, and so forth. Jody, I don't know if you wanted to take one.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So a client texts the therapist about running late for an appointment. Therapist responds with, okay. A few months later, the client texts the therapist about being in crisis and overshares information that they previously discussed in session. How should the therapist respond? And how can the therapist prevent this from happening in the therapist-client relationship? Because we talked in the previous workshop, this never happens, right? We tell clients don't text us and they listen very well, right?
That's right.
And so, right. So setting the boundaries. Okay.
Boundaries.
So how should the therapist respond? Is there something in particular that the therapist could put in their response to the text? What would you do if you were able to kind of process this and really think? What might you say in the text response? You can unmute if you want.
So,
okay, good. Talking now. Can you talk now? Maybe call them on the actual phone instead of all the texting. Good. I'm sorry, but we'll have to discuss this only in person. This is not appropriate for text. Let's discuss at our next session. We've discussed texting is not secure method. Right. Please call me. Okay. Yep. You guys get the idea.
this is great. Just to summarize, I guess, this idea of sort of closing down the text thing gently, right? and then saying, how about you, let's not put all this info on the text. Let's have a call or something like that, right?
My thought would be to definitely put something in text to say that this is not what texting is used for, so that you have it documented.
Mhm,
And then you pick up the phone and call,
mhm.
and then you rediscuss it or review the informed consent, maybe just verbally without, pulling everything out the next session, to make sure that you're positioning it, that you're trying to protect the client's confidentiality and their privacy. And that's the only reason that you appear to have such strict ways of operating and communicating. Sometimes I don't think that individuals realize that we are doing this because our profession has trained us. And they think, well, don't you like to text? What's the big deal about texting? Right.
And in our last presentation, Jody did a great job of sort of summarizing a lot of elements there, like one being that there's often a generational divide in terms of texting, right? The folks who are Gen Y,
Millennials and Gen Zs, yeah.
they have a tendency to text like everything and not worry about the privacy of that so much, whereas that's sort of not consistent with HIPAA. It's not consistent with our way of communicating clinically. And also, a lot of us are of a different generation, right? And so the way we, our sort of fluency with technology might not be quite as good, and our comfort level with technology might not be quite there too. So those are important considerations as well.
And what about, how could a therapist prevent this from happening? What are your thoughts? Put in, chat, unmute. How do you prevent this? All right. Discuss in a session. What else?
We'll see if people were listening in the last session, because we laid it out pretty thoroughly.
Right. Informing upon entry. Okay. Block their number. That's an interesting one, right? All with the informed consent. Good. Okay. So this is also partially a trick question, because I don't believe that we can prevent people from doing this, especially if that's how they communicate with everyone in their circle. And they have a relationship with you, and they're in a little bit of a stressed or feeling overwhelmed. They're actually not going to be thinking quite as clearly, and they're going to go and use their go-to way of processing how they're feeling. And if they are used to texting, just like they're used to posting in social media, you're going to get that text. So I just constantly, say we're never going to prevent these behaviors 100%. We're going to protect when these things happen by informing in the beginning, having something in writing, and verbally reviewing and documenting that we had those reviews, so that if something ever happened and the text messages were used in court, we at least have the other documentation and the date stamps to go along with it. And some people say use a office phone number, right? We know a lot of clinicians across the country now that don't have landlines, right? And so again, it's going to happen for some individuals, because that is their only way. And just having the company issued phone is not enough. It helps, right? But it clearly does not prevent the being at risk for confidentiality or privacy breaches. So, okay. And some people were really responding right away to the crisis part of this. And right. And that's another piece. You have to make sure that you've thoroughly, assessed the crisis and made sure that you act appropriately if it is truly a crisis, as opposed to if it's a crisis to the client. But it doesn't necessarily mean as a professional, we have to act on it.
And I noticed someone put the comment of setting boundaries and letting the client know your cell phone shut down at night, which you know, I mean, you don't want to be responding to people at 2 a.m. or be having,
Right.
most of us are not a 24-hour crisis service, right? You know, it is possible, for example, that some people may use their own personal cell phone clinically sometimes too, right? Like not everybody has a separate cell phone for their clinical work and for their personal life. So sometimes people's cell phone is not shut down, you know, overnight, and it's actually still active.
Yeah.
So and there are different considerations with that too. So.
Yeah. This reminds me of a time I had a client that had completed therapy with me. And several months later, the client calls my work cell phone, but does not leave a voicemail. And within minutes, I get a LinkedIn request from the client's mother. And within a minute after that, I get an in message from the client's mother in LinkedIn. So she's literally messaging me. And all of this is on a Sunday evening at 5 p.m. So again, this is a former client.
Wow.
Right? And you know, I just pause for a moment, regroup, what exactly is happening. And I responded back in LinkedIn and said, this is not an appropriate way to contact me if there is for clinical reasons, or if there's a crisis. If this is an emergency, please call 911. I am not providing general office hours on a Sunday evening. And, you know, that could go either way. And luckily for me, the mother responded back and said, I truly apologize. This is not a crisis. We will contact you the appropriate way tomorrow during business hours. So luckily for me, that was an opportunity to role model, right? This is not appropriate use of text, still responding, but not responding. So when you think about that, it was all, we understand a relapse happens, boom, 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 the family's in crisis, right? And what does that mean? So any other thoughts about, you know, the texting? I think most of us will walk away today really understanding the importance of addressing text messaging because it is here to stay and a lot of individuals will be using it. Okay.
I think there's, you know, a couple of comments like using upfront protocols, right? You know, from the very beginning, someone put that out there. I think that's really a great point. Just having things set in place where you can sort of say, here are my policies on this. You know, we do that to maintain your privacy, to maintain confidentiality, and also to ensure that you're safe, that you're trying to reach out to me at appropriate times and in appropriate ways. And if you need a crisis intervention, you would reach out to the appropriate services, not to me when I can't reach you, right? So
yeah, it's a lot of, you know, reviewing for sure. Okay, so we have 15 minutes left and we have some pretty fast ones that we have set up for you. So we'll kind of jump in and see what you think of these. A newly hired therapist is very tech savvy. The therapist has his clients download specific apps for mental health or addiction based on the presenting issue and treatment plan. The agency doesn't have a policy regarding the use of apps in therapy. So what does the therapist need to do to ensure only HIPAA compliant apps are used? And what harm can be done by recommending these apps? So either unmute, put some things in the chat. But this is, if you haven't seen this yet, it'll happen. It's coming. Get a release from the client. Make sure you research the apps, right? Download them and check them out first, right? Good. So this is what the therapist needs to do. And then what also can the agency be doing?
I have an answer, but I don't want to be the answer.
Maybe displaying the policies on their website.
So yeah, have the policy somewhere, write the policy, right?
Develop
Create
one.
the policy about the use of apps, especially mental health related apps in therapy, right? You can put them on the informed consent. Perfect. Someone said the agency they work at blocks a lot. Okay, so that's another great example. It's not enough to just block what people do. Make sure you call it out. The agency does not recommend the use of apps. Put it in writing. This newly hired therapist, make sure that they fully understand the policies and procedures of the agency, right? And this is hard when everybody's behind closed doors all day long, right? Sometimes it's more difficult to monitor that. Have your tech person research these. This is good, right?
I think it's important too that your IT professional is aware of HIPAA and aware of HIPAA compliance with all of the technological, platforms that are used, whether that's an app, whether that's a telehealth platform.
Right.
In the last talk, we were talking about even payment platforms like, PayPal is not HIPAA compliant, but there are some platforms that are HIPAA compliant for paying for services, for example.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it might be better to endorse and approve a very short list of apps that the staff know the agency is saying yes to, and not just keep trying to use the next app that's out on the market or that has, the latest thing, the shiny object. But yeah, this is a big one, because I also believe that between sessions, some individuals can learn a lot through the use of the appropriate apps in terms of psychoeducation, learning more about symptoms of depression or anxiety, all those things that in between sessions, they actually progress and get better sooner through the use of incorporating tech in therapy. But we've got to make sure that we have the right safeguards as well. Okay. All right. Since March of 2020 with COVID, many therapists were forced to work from their home to provide teletherapy. One agency provided laptops, but did not encrypt the hard drives before giving to their licensed therapists. The clinical director created a Dropbox account with a shared folder for her clinical team, and she encouraged the team to only save work and client-related files to Dropbox instead of the hard drive. This included clinical reports, an example like Gottman relationship reports, and client letters. So is this HIPAA compliant solution during COVID and the pandemic? Go ahead and put yes, no. What do you think? So we're specifically talking about Dropbox.
Seeing some no's. Mostly no's here.
Right. So, well, is it a solution during COVID? And this, I think, is where some people might have misinterpreted the emergency use during the pandemic. Right. And I'd always encourage people to try and use the right solution from the get-go, because clients and in this case, staff will get used to it. So if it was only during emergency and then you take it away and try and give them something else, right, it's harder to pull people away from that. Even though you are saying, wait, is Dropbox encrypted? Yep, you have to have a special account in order to do that. Now, Dropbox is easy and free, right? And so you could see the best of intentions of this clinical director to keep things from the hard drive and store them all in one place when everybody is working remote. Again, the best, use is to have the IT person involved, because the cost of Dropbox might be prohibitive when it's HIPAA compliant than using a different solution that achieves the exact same outcome. Right. And so this is file storage, just like Zoom was the video. And everybody just says Zoom, but that doesn't mean that it is HIPAA compliant. And so, is this a HIPAA compliant solution post-pandemic? Why or why not? We have to really think, what are we trying to solve? And what's the best way moving forward, since the staff are going to get used to doing it a certain way? So does anybody use Dropbox in their clinic? Another version of cloud-based storage for files? Okay, some say yes.
In our clinical research, we sometimes use box.com.
Yes, and Box is HIPAA compliant. Right. And then Jennifer says, I have Dropbox only for training purposes, right? And that's a good example of using cloud-based storage for certain things. And then whoops, all of a sudden, all it takes is one file that's got confidential information to be saved on it. And then what, right? And she's choosing a shared folder with the entire clinical team. Does that mean that the entire clinical team is on a need to know basis for all the files that are in that folder? So now we've got the colleagues, right, issue and dilemma.
Which is sort of similar to the issue we might see in an electronic medical record in a larger agency too, that sometimes you may have access to client records that you really shouldn't have access to, right?
Right.
You may be able to access something you shouldn't. And in that case, there's usually a way of tracking who has actually accessed the file. So if you know you shouldn't be accessing the files, then don't, because your boss might look up who's been accessing, and then you could get into trouble that way too. So.
And we talked before about the medical side of things and the mental health side. And when you have that interdisciplinary team, so you have the medical and the behavioral health all functioning in that collaborative space, and then the medical side wants access to the mental health records and what they call break the glass, I think it is. These are those issues that continue to keep coming up. So yeah, good. You guys really seem to have a handle on this, but so easy to accidentally save in a non-HIPAA compliant solution, when all the right intentions were there. All right, a mental health group practice has been expanding its marketing efforts. One therapist suggests that the agency create a YouTube channel and create live events promoting mental health and addiction to build a sense of community. So what does this practice need to determine before moving forward with regards to protecting former and current client confidentiality and which platform to use? So is YouTube the right choice? And what are those potential risks involved in implementing this? Right. So this is getting a lot more attention, these YouTube channels. Video is how we, can keep the younger generations entertained and clicking on things and staying on a website long enough because they see that we have a YouTube channel. Okay, so good. Live events could especially be a problem due to HIPAA. Yep. Yeah, YouTube is excellent for education, but how do you build that sense of community, right? You're a mental health group practice. Your clients are going to see you have a YouTube channel. They're going to want to then click on it, participate in it, something like that. So then the question is YouTube the right choice? What do you know? What do you not know about YouTube? Okay. Some people are saying no. Is YouTube the right choice? Right. Getting a lot of no's. Okay. And some say, yeah, I'd like to use it, right? How do we tap in and get our names out there to the people that could benefit from our services? And we have people thinking very creatively, thinking of how they get their information, how they interact with the internet, how they interact with YouTube. So why not with mental health? You do it with other ways, other reasons. Why not, right? YouTube is not HIPAA compliant as of right now. There's all kinds of issues related to this, because then if you have a private YouTube account, people have to subscribe to it. Now they have their name attached when they subscribe, and on and on. And because this is a mental health group practice, a licensed mental health, there are more risks than benefits from promoting mental health and addiction on a live YouTube channel.
Someone made an interesting point that I was sort of thinking about partnering with NAMI or other support groups in that way. You can imagine circumstances where an advocacy group or organization might want to sort of have videos of people in recovery or for mental health or addiction problems engaging in pro-social activities or coming together in celebration or other things. And in that case, if you're sort of filming people, you might get people in there who don't want to be on screen, don't want to be kind of outed as having a mental health issue or having an addiction issue. And in that case, you could also have a liability issue, especially if you've gotten releases of information from those folks, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. And Melissa, you're right. This whole live, I purposely said live event because the pre-recorded isn't the same for clients. They want that live interaction, but the risks are there because of their revealing who they are. Or someone could easily figure out who someone is in this small world that we live in.
Looks like we just got the 1 minute warning, Jody.
Perfect. Good. So it sounds like you guys are all on the same page.
This is Bill again. I want to thank David and Jody for this roundtable and for their presentation today. And hopefully the great discussion indicates we need to have more discussion about it. So again, thank you for your excellent presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone for being here. You've really committed a lot of time today to this, and we thank you.
Bill, Ashley, I see you there. Thanks. Great.
There's my contact information. And David's.
And Jody, it's been great working with you on this.
This has been wonderful, David. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it and enjoyed it.
Thank you both. This has been fabulous.
Okay, thanks, Jody.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you.